I've been interested in old cars for ever, really. I've always enjoyed cars that have got a bit more charm than a modern car. You couldn't do anything like this unless you were really interested and enjoyed it. I spend probably at least 14 of my weekends throughout the year away at race meetings, working. When I first took over Longstone Tyres back in '99, the business was pretty much just involved in dealing with pre-war cars. And this is more your Edwardian tyre, ranging back to the beginnings of the pneumatic tyre. It's called a Beaded edge tyre. And then in the sort of mid-20s, about 1924, 25-ish, moved on to a cross-ply tyre. It's like this, still quite a tall, thin tyre with not a huge amount of rubber in contact with the road. And then in the 30s, we moved on to more structured tyres, like this one here. But since I've taken the business over, it's become apparent to me that my wider interest in cars has made me want to move on to the classic range of tyres. And what we've got here is the Michelin X. This is the first radial tyre, fitted to loads of really important cars, really groundbreaking cars like early Citroens, and this was originally fitted to the Lancia Aurelia when it first left the factory in 1952. The Michelin X, the radial tyre, was developed in 1946, pretty much straight after the war. And then here we've got the first asymmetric tyre, the Michelin XAS. And then we range right on now to right up to the sort of early 90s. This is a Ferrari Testarossa rear tyre. You're starting to get a lot fatter here and a lot more low profile. And Longstone Tyres also do with these sort of classic and historic sports car road legal racing tyres as well. This one here is a semi-slick, only just road legal, but a brilliant tyre if it's what you want. Here we've got my wife's car. It's a very typical 60s classic car. It's a Daimler V8. A lot of fun and a lovely thing to waft around in. These cars originally were fitted with a 640/15 Dunlop RS5. There is their cross-ply with a thin footprint. Later these cars moved on to radial tyres. The problem you get with a radial tyre is it immediately makes the steering heavier. And people often fit something like this, which has got a similar diameter, but it's got a much wider footprint. Both these car tyres here aren't actually period classic tyres. They've got a different carcass build and a different width footprint. But if you move on to something like this, the Dunlop tyre, this is what the slightly later E-Type Jags fitted, and that was a Michelin alternative of the day, the asymmetric XVS, which will make your steering superb. And then Avon made this tyre, which was fitted to a lot of Aston Martins of the day, again the same size. This is a very popular tyre size for 60s cars. But what we found for this car in particular, the Daimler V8, is that Michelin's XAS 180/15 is actually slightly thinner in footprint, and it gives you the right diameter and keeps the steering nice and light and will make this car handle perfectly well. That's one of the things at Longstone Tyres, because we're, what should we say, anoraks, nerds ourselves and classic car enthusiasts, we're interested in what's going to make the car drive as well as we possibly can. For instance, this is my wife's car. I've done my best to make it drive as well as it can do. Once you're a petrol head, you're a petrol head. Even though your interest is predominantly vintage, you still like other things, quirky design and charming manufacturing of cars. So I moved into classic cars, and now we do all sorts of weird and wonderful tyres right throughout to the beginning of the 90s. Just to show you some kind of range of the depth of variety that Longstone Tyres have, this is for early to sort of mid-20s vintage Bentley. These tyres here are actually sold and waiting to be collected by a customer of ours who runs a Stanley steam car that held the land speed record back in the early Edwardian times, going over 100 miles an hour in a steam car. And this is from Model T Ford, probably the most popular tyre of the late Edwardian times and right throughout the middle of the 20s. Down this aisle we've got the vintage tyres ranging from 21-inch rims, and the rim sizes go down there into the sort of early 30s tyres here. More of the 30s and 20s tyres down this aisle here, and on the other side here we move on to the 50s cross-plies and the 40s cross-plies here. And then we start with the radial tyres. Down here we've got some good radial alternatives for 50s cars that may originally have run on a cross-ply tyre. And down here the radial tyres for 50s, 60s, and moving into the 80s, some of the millimetric rim size TRXs and the early Ferrari tyres of the 90s. And on this side here we've got the 50s Dunlop racing tyres with 15-inch rims and 13-inch rims, moving up here to sort of late 30s racing tyres with the 16-inch rims, through 18-inch, 19-inch rims of the very early vintage racing tyres. And up on the rack above there, you can see our tarmac rallying tyres of the 70s and 80s, road legal racing tyres. This is Michelin's XWX, fitted to all sorts of European exotica of the 70s, like the Ferrari Dino and the Lamborghini Miura. It's a fantastic tyre, the highest speed rating of the time. And as an example of how diverse Longstone Tyres is, this is a Michelin TRX, a millimetric tyre. This tyre in particular was only fitted to about 2 or 3 years of the Ferrari Testarossa, and just a rear tyre at that. Probably only about 20-30 cars that actually still fit this tyre. One of the things we do at Longstone is we concentrate on balancing unusual wheels. This is a Rudd Whitworth splined wheel centre with a knock-on nut, and we can balance those. Most of the companies don't bother doing that. Longstone Tyres is definitely a place for unusual wheels.